This is Class A Carry, and today I'm going to set up the Tiny John. Here are the supplies and tools I'll be using today. Safety glasses, 3/4 inch wrench, propane regulator, various fittings to connect the hoses, a 30-inch extension hose to the propane tank, a set of booster cables for the DC power, a 1-to-1 mixture of water and dish soap for the leak test, and the wax paper liners for the Tiny John, 12-volt DC battery, completely filled new propane cylinder, 20 pounds. Last but not least, are feces donations from my 3 cats. Before I begin the setup and installation of the Tiny John, I just want to make note of a couple of important safety reminders so that we are safe. First of all, we want to be sure to have proper propane equipment and to comply with all of the local regulation and codes in your area. We also want to make sure at any time we do not restrict the airflow to the Tiny John, because that could result in incomplete combustion and cause carbon monoxide problems. We also want to make sure that we keep our surrounding area free of combustibles and smoke, gasoline, all flammable liquids and vapors. The first step in installing the Tiny John is to put in the ventilation system. The Tiny John comes with this adapter, and it fits on as so. The Tiny John uses 3-inch double wall piping type B, and here's an example of the piping. You can take a look on the inside there and see the double walls, and it's about 3 inches. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to forego setting up the entire venting system because I am only doing this video as a demonstration. I am not yet setting this up into my RV yet. When I do that, I will show the complete and proper ventilation system requirements. But for now, I'm just going to use a short section of pipe. The Tiny John manual shows multiple ways that venting can be installed in your home or RV, but again, I'll just be installing this small vent for the demonstration purposes. We will definitely go into the full installation later. The next step to installing the Tiny John, once you have your venting completed, is to hook up power. My Tiny John that I ordered uses 12 volts DC. So I have obtained a deep cycle 12 volt battery. So now I will hook up the positive and the negative ends to the positive and negative terminals of the battery. Now, keep in mind that the Tiny John and other incinerating toilet companies have different means of power than just 12 volt batteries, the one that I prefer. Some other options when ordering the Tiny John, you can get AC, 120 volt AC, or you could get 240 volts AC. And of course the amp hours are different for all 3 choices. With my choice, the 12 volts, it equals out to be 1.5 amp hours used. The 120 volts AC uses a 0.15 amp hours, and the 240 VAC uses 0.075 amp hours. The wires coming from the Tiny John to hook up to power do not fit on the terminals on the 12-volt battery. So that is what I have the booster cables. I've already hooked up positive and negative to the Tiny John. Now I'm going to hook up positive to the battery. Now I'll hook up negative to the battery. Turn on main power. And the Tiny John is starting. It's difficult to see here in the display. You can see the power LED is on. It is blue. And then the readout says 2.5. Good to go for power. The next step is to set up propane. So I have my propane cylinder here, a relatively safe distance away from the Tiny John. Right down here is the Tiny John propane connector. And here you can see I have my propane hookup hoses. I added an extension to the regulator portion of the hose because I felt it wasn't long enough. So I had to add some adapters there. Once that is done, we go ahead and we hook up the hose. We first start hand tight to be careful of thread stripping. And we're going to want to use 2 different wrenches. I'll zoom in here. You can see this part is going to get a wrench to tighten. And the part behind it to hold it steady so we do not ruin the propane connection. And I'll do that right now. I use the 2 wrenches, and the propane connection to the Tiny John to the hose is nice and tight. Now it's time to connect the regulator part of the hose to the propane tank. I've already checked all parts to be sure they're in good shape. Now keep in mind, the propane tank is still closed, it is off. And one needs to be very careful not to strip threads, and we do not use tools when tightening this section. These only go on hand tight. All right. We turn it in a positive motion, righty-tighty, until we feel a positive stop. I am there. So here's what it looks like so far from the propane tank all the way to the Tiny John. Now it is time for the leak test of our connections on the propane. We're going to brush on some solution here at these connections and right here at the Tiny John to make certain that there are no propane leaks. What I have here is a 1-to-1 ratio of dish soap to water. I have poured some into this bowl, and then I have a foam brush that we will brush the solution on, and then we're going to look for expanding bubbles that would indicate a leak. So the first step for the leak test is to slowly turn on our propane tank. I'm going to do that right now. Okay, the propane should be flowing through the regulator and through the hose. Let's check for leaks. We'll start here at the Tiny John first. Now you notice it's already kind of bubbly and soapy, but we're going to look for new bubbles forming like they're being blown from air. It doesn't appear that there's any at the moment. Let's check the other connectors. Okay. Okay, do you see those bubbles forming right there? That is a leak. So what this is indicating is that I didn't tighten those adapters on enough. Right there, that is definitely a propane leak. So if you find a propane leak, we turn off the propane tank immediately. Okay, it's turned off. You look over here, you can see that it was bubbling over there as well. You can get focused properly. Okay, it popped. So I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, they're still coming. I'm going to go ahead and re-tighten all the fittings, and then we'll try the test again. I have re-tightened the connectors in the propane line. Let's see how they work now. Slowly open the propane. All right. Now, we'll add the soap again. And we are getting some weather in the area. Okay, now let's check for bubbles. It does not look like propane is leaking out of these connections again. I had purposely the first time just hand tightened the connections, and that is why we've seen the propane leaks. Just to give you an example of why it is very important when working with the connectors to tighten them with tools. Look at that. There is no propane leaking this time. We'll double check here at the Tiny John again, just to make certain. And we are good at that connection too. Do not see any leaks in the hose at all. Right there. Okay. Safe to say we have passed the leak test and we are good. We are now ready to test the Tiny John. So just to recap, the power on. You can see the blue LED light there for power, because I have main power turned on. I have the battery hooked up to the power connections on the Tiny John there. I have a temporary vent installation, means that I am outdoors. I can get away with not having the full piping installed per the manual. However, you must do the correct installation whenever you install these indoors or in areas that are cramped. This is just for demonstration purposes only, thus the modified version of the venting. Here's where the propane is hooked up to the back. I have a hose extension, leak tested, both the connection there and the connections here. No leaks. And here is our propane source. Let's get started.